if you want something done right, get some help. Wait, did I say that wrong? I think the saying is if you want something done right, do it yourself. I would actually switch that around and say, if you want something done your way, do it yourself. That's what we're really talking about, isn't it? Doing it our way, getting it done the way we want it done. But when you're talking about leading a lot of people, you can't do it all yourself. Everything will have to funnel through you, and it will clog up the entire organization. This is what's going on as we find the children of Israel in the desert. Moses is trying to do it all himself. His father-in-law shows up, bringing to him his wife and his children, and I'm sure he's glad to see them, but you know in-laws, they have some advice. Jethro, his father-in-law, looks and sees what Moses is doing, and he says, "Why are you doing it this way?" And Moses says, "Well, they come to me. They come to me. I've got to do it because they're coming to me." And Jethro says, "Well, if they all jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff?" No, that's not what he said. But you can imagine that might be what he would say. That's what most parents say to their kids. No, he's a little more empathetic. He says, "This work is too heavy for you. You are wearing yourself out, and you're wearing out these people." Do you remember when you learned that sometimes it's better to have some help? Sometimes it's better to spread the load. I think I was maybe in about 9th grade when I really remember learning this lesson. We were in a geography class, and Mr. Chambers was our teacher. He assigned us different countries to study, and then he assigned us into groups. I remember asking him, "Can't we pick our own groups?" He said, "Nope, you'll be in the group that I assign you to." I didn't like that. My grade was important to me. I was a bit of a nerd, and I didn't know who else I might get. Well, it was typical. I was a nerd, and then they gave us a jock, and then they gave me to work with a pothead. I don't know any other word to say that. That's what he was. That's what he claimed. And I thought, oh no. This athletic guy, he's not know a whole lot, and this pothead, he's just out there. And so we started talking about Germany. Well, the athlete's father was a colonel in the Air Force, and they had been stationed in Germany, and he knew all about Germany. The pothead, I came to find out, was actually a very creative person. And every time we started talking, he would say, "Have y'all thought about this? Have you thought about this? Maybe we could present things this way." I kind of just organized it all and got it together. But they knew more than me. It was a better presentation because we worked together. I remember in seminary taking a leadership class, and they taught us about church administration and about how if we are going to lead a church, we must empower others. That's what Jesus did. Jesus chose disciples, he trained them, and then told them to disciple others. We all need help from time to time, especially when we go through those desert times in our life. We go through those dry times in our life. We go through those times when we don't feel that we have strength on our own. What is it the Beatles say? I get by with a little help from my friends. Every once in a while we need some help, especially during stressful times. Because when we're in the desert and we're in those times that are stressing us out, it skews our thinking. Now, I don't know about you, but when I get stressed, I often feel alone. Moses' response was classic. Jethro says to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "Because I have to. I'm the only one that can do this. I'm all alone in this." Heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? He thought he had to do it all. While we've been going through this pandemic, we have literally been separated from one another. Whether through our having to keep social distance or wear a mask and not being able to see each other, or whether we've actually had COVID and had to quarantine or been exposed to someone, we have been separated. Our church has been affected. Our attendance is down. We can't do the things we'd like. Our community is somewhat polarized and divisive. I was looking on the CDC website about this feeling alone, and it was talking about the pandemic can stress you. And some of the things that talked about were feelings of anger or feelings of fear or sadness or worry or frustration, changes in appetite. Some people quit eating, some people eat too much. Your energy may go away, your interest may wane, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, physical reactions such as headaches or body pains and stomach problems, worsening of chronic health problems, worsening of mental health conditions, increased use of alcohol and tobacco and other substances. I got depressed just reading all that. But it's true. When we're stressed, it can affect us in so many ways, and one of the ways it can affect us is we feel all alone. Fortunately, that website also has some ways to decrease stress. They talk about taking breaks from looking at all the news constantly. They talk about eating healthy and getting exercise and getting good sleep, working on a hobby, doing something you enjoy. And then as I kept reading, it said this: make sure to stay connected with your friends and family and your faith community. There it was. The Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia said, church is healthy for you. It's good for you. It reconnects you with people. Whether you're coming here and connecting in person or whether you're connecting online or through some of our online offerings. It's good to connect with others. We are not all alone. We are in the presence of God and in the presence of others. We're going to sing a song in a little while called We Are Travelers on This Journey. Fellow pilgrims, walking together. There's another thing we do, though, sometimes when we're in the desert. Not only do sometimes we feel alone and forget that God is with us and others are with us, we try to do it all. We try to control things. That's what trying to do it all is really about, is trying to get some control in our life. Moses says, I need to do this. Moses has been called to lead the people, but he's doing it wrong. He's taking all the responsibility upon himself. Have you ever been on a team or a committee and the chairperson did it all? The leader just did the stuff. You may at first thought, well, this is great. I don't have to do anything. But after a while, you probably felt as if you were not needed, as if you were undervalued. That was probably not about you. That was probably about the leader and their fear and their stress and wanting to make sure things got done certain ways. But we all know that feeling, don't we? When we are undervalued, we try to do things all ourselves sometimes, and it's not helping others and it's not helping us. You see, we can't control it all. That's an illusion, but we really can't. The people were in the desert. It was hot, it was dry, they were hungry, they were thirsty. No one wanted to be in the desert, but God had led them there. God was leading them through the desert, but at this moment they were there. As we said last week, you're here. Get used to it. We don't want to be in a pandemic. I hate the restrictions we have to live under. I don't like living in fear. I don't like the grief that's going on. And so sometimes we can be like Moses and we just try to control so much. Here's the problem. When we take control of everything, we take control away from God. How can we say we are people of faith and then not trust God along the way? God has these people in this desert, not only to get them to the promised land because they had to go through there, but God has them there that they might learn to trust God. God has a great future for the people, and God has a great future for our church. But we must learn to trust God. You remember last week I told you the lessons of the desert where God wanted to refine, define, and assign. That God wanted to take away that impurities in our life, and God wanted to define us as God's people and assign us to do God's work. What is it that God wants from us right now amidst this stressful time? God wants us to learn to trust and obey, as the old hymn says. To learn how to live like God's people. So when we get to where God is leading us, we will live like God's people. To learn to live in hope and love even in our darkest days. You see, if we continue to try to do it all like Moses did, we will wear ourselves out, like Jethro said Moses would do. Some years ago, I had the privilege of teaching a program called Young Leaders. It was a group of pastors who were younger into ministry, and they would come and we would spend several weekends together looking at their ministry and looking at their leadership style. I truly got hope from these folks, but I also knew what kind of stresses they were under. I remember the assignment we would do the very first time we got together. We'd give them a big sheet of paper, and we'd say, draw on this paper what your ministry is like right now. I remember one young woman drew a roller coaster going up and down, up and down. She said, this is what ministry is like. Good days and bad days, ups and down. Another fellow drew a circus. And in that, he was standing in the middle, and he said, I feel like a ringmaster of a bunch of folks, and I can't quite get it all together. Someone else drew themselves in the middle of a bunch of cats. He was herding cats. He said, that's what it's like to be a pastor. And then I will never forget, one young man drew a picture of plates on poles spinning. Have any of y'all ever seen the old plate spinners that they would get a plate spinning and they go and spin another plate and then they go put another one, spin it, and then this one over here was stopping to spin. They go spin it and they'd spin around. And I identified so much with that young pastor because I had done this program, Young Leaders, years before. And when I drew my picture, I actually had drawn plates spinning as well. This is what it can be like. Trying to lead at any time, but trying to lead in the midst of stressful days is difficult. Not just for pastors, it's difficult for medical workers. I cannot imagine the stress that many of the folks that work at our hospital, especially those in ICU, may be under right now, and we need to do everything we can to help them. I think about our school teachers who have to constantly shift things in the way they are teaching and doing their best. I think about wait staff in restaurants. I was going in a restaurant the other day to pick up some takeout, and I saw a sign. It said, "Be kind to our servers." These are the ones that actually showed up today. And I thought about how often we might just demand of things and forget the stress that people may be under. I may not have named your stress, but I know that this is a stressful time. We're all stressed. We all want COVID to be over with. We want our lives back. We want to get living again. But why are we waiting for something to change? Why don't we change? You see, things can get better even if you're in the desert. Jethro comes along and tells Moses, hey, you can improve the way things are going. You have some control here. Al-Anon is a program for folks who love people who are addicted to alcohol. In that program, as they leave each day, there's a little closure, they say. In it is a saying that I love. It says this: there is no situation too difficult to be bettered, and there is no unhappiness too great to be lessened. In other words, things can be better. We can find ways to make things better. Moses did not understand in the midst of his visit from his father-in-law that he was going to be in the desert for a long time, for 40 years. When they went into the desert, they thought, well, we'll get through this. We'll go on to where God is leading us. And they ended up wandering around in the desert for so long. If Moses had not learned how to adapt, learned how to change his leadership style, think how difficult that would be. Think how much more difficult it would be. You see, we don't have to do it all. We are together. We can help each other. Jethro comes along and says to Moses, something's got to shift here. You can't do this. You've got to change. And here are some ways I think we can change. First of all, when we are stressed, we need to recognize our limits. Know what you can do and what you can't do. Consider how much you can do and do that, and let the rest go or find ways to have others do it. You see, we always have our limits. I was thinking back to the Olympics and Simone Biles, one of the greatest gymnasts of all time. She was very courageous to go and testify recently of abuse. But you remember back in the Tokyo Olympics when she withdrew first from some of the team things and then from some of the individual. What was going on there? At first she got a lot of criticism, but then she began to explain. She said she had something called the twisties. I had never heard of the twisties. What it is when a gymnast can't tell up from down, they're experiencing disassociation. When they're in the air, they can't tell how to land, and it's very, very dangerous. And she bravely said, I can't do this right now. I might get hurt. I might go out there and score miserably when there are others on the team who can do this now. And stepped in and stepped up. The best thing she could do for her team was to say, hey, I'm just not in a good place right now. That's brave. We all need to know our limits. We also need to find wise counsel. This is one of my favorite stories if y'all haven't figured it out. This story of Jethro coming, this father-in-law, and he's not just Moses' father-in-law, though, is he? Jethro is a priest of Midian. Jethro is the one who, when Moses was wandering in the desert the first time, took Moses into his household and loved him, gave him his own daughter to marry, and helped to raise him. I'm sure this is not the first advice Moses ever got from Jethro. This is the man who, when Moses was down in Egypt, kept Moses' wife and children safe. We need to find people who are wise and talk to them. Talk things out. My friends, that is not the internet. The internet is not wise counsel. It is information, but it is not wisdom. How is Christianity supposed to work? Well, as I mentioned earlier, look back at the lessons that Jesus taught. Jesus chose disciples and poured his life into these disciples and then gave to them the ministry, and they formed disciples and they poured their lives into those disciples, and it went and it went and it went. If you are a Christian, you both need a mentor, someone who knows more, who's ahead of you in the faith, and you also need some mentees, some folks that you are helping. You should be being discipled, and you should be discipling others. Find wise counsel and give wise counsel. We also need to recognize our resources. Moses was doing all this stuff by himself, and here were all of these people around him, many of whom were capable leaders. Jethro looked around and said, hey, there's some talent here, and you're overlooking these folks, Moses. Empower them. The first church I served out of seminary was Rehoboth Baptist Chapel. It was a mission church. We had a little double-wide trailer that we met in. We were so happy when we got to build our first church, and the only way we could afford to build it was we were going to have volunteer labor. We poured the slab, got it ready for the volunteers to show up, to put up the walls and the roof and to dry this in, and we had 100 volunteers come for the first week. The goal was to dry it in. When we got them all together, and I had a prayer for them, and then I introduced them to Fred. Fred was a guy in our church who was kind of helping oversee this construction. He was really good at construction. He could build anything. And then we let the folks go, and they started building. They started moving walls and nailing stuff together. And Fred started going around telling people, stop. Don't do that right now. Wait just a minute, I'll come back to you. And he'd run over there and he'd stop some other people, and he'd stop these people. And what was going on was Fred was overwhelmed. He was a great carpenter, but he wasn't a great organizer. He wanted it done in certain ways, and he couldn't control 100 people. Fortunately, there was a guy there that week named Bob. Bob was an architect. Bob had drawn the buildings out. He was the one who had done the blueprints. Bob every year went to a church and helped build it. Bob pulled Fred aside and said, you are a wonderful person. You've got a lot of skills, I can tell. But so do these other folks. You're going to be really important. I'm not going to be here after this week. But for this week, if you would step back just a little and let me lead, I promise you we'll get this building dried in. Fred said, all right, do it, Bob. Bob called everybody back together. He made 8 teams. He sent them to the 4 corners of the church, 2 teams each. One of the teams in each corner started assembling walls together and nailing them. The other team would pick up the walls when they were finished, and they would go place them where they would go. You see, Bob had drawn these sections out to be built like that. And by the end of the day, all the walls were up, and the next day the crane came to put on the trusses, and folks got up on the roof. It was amazing. Why? Because this architect recognized that if we all work together with a little bit of organization, we could accomplish something amazing. You see, you can get through the desert. You really can. But only if we help one another. I remember reading an article some time ago about Harbor Insurance Agency. Harbor Insurance Agency is a mid-sized company in Southwest Florida. They're a good company. The people that work there like working there, and what they really like is they like helping people who have experienced difficulties. They go in and write the checks. They go in and help folks find people to reconstruct their houses, especially after hurricanes. For Florida gets hit with hurricanes. However, in 2017, Hurricane Irma came through Naples and ripped off the roof of the headquarters of the Harbor Insurance Agency. There they were, the folks that were supposed to help people recover, and they didn't even have an office. It was flooded. All of the computer equipment was ruined. And they came together and said, what are we going to do? We've got to take care of our own business, and at the same time, we've got thousands of clients who need us. You know what they did? They started reorganizing. They said, we can't do it the same way we've been doing it, but we can figure out how to do it. They rented some other space. They got some other computers. They set up places out in other communities where they could get out to where the people were, and they got it done. As I've thought about the desert that we are kind of in as a community, as a nation, and as a church, the stresses of COVID and stresses of a lot of other things as well, I kind of feel like that insurance company, do you? It's our job to be helping, to be in the community, to be the people of hope, and at the same time, it feels like all the ways that we do it aren't really possible at this moment. And in that, I wonder what God wants from us. I do not for a moment believe that our task has been changed, but the way we do it might have to shift. And who knows what wonderful things might happen. When Jethro showed up and said to Moses, you can't do it all. You got to shift. You got to work together. All of a sudden, this throng of people got organized and things got better. We can't do it all ourselves, but together under God's leadership, we can do whatever it is God is calling us to do.